number 9, we have the 1842 slave revolt in the Cherokee Nation. For whatever reason, history tends to ignore all the native Indian tribes that had purchased and mistreated enslaved Africans. The Cherokee were one of the biggest perpetrators of this. The rebellion on Indian Cherokee territory took place in Oklahoma and was the largest escape of a group of slaves that occurred amongst the Cherokee. The slave November 15, 1842, when a group of 20 African American slaves owned by the Cherokee escaped and tried to reach Mexico, where slavery had been abolished in 1836. Along their way south, they were joined by 15 slaves escaping from the Creek in Indian Territory. They raided local stores for weapons, ammunition, horses, and mules. The Cherokee amassed a small army along with some Choctaw warriors to pursue them and eventually caught up.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Wait, first of all, you're not going to speed past that like you didn't just say what you just said.
John Horse and the Black Seminoles deserve to be remembered for a number of reasons. They created the largest haven in the U.S. South for runaway slaves. They led the largest slave revolt in U.S. history. They secured the only emancipation of rebellious slaves prior to the U.S. Civil War, and they formed the largest mass exodus of slaves across the United States, moving from the Florida Everglades through Indian Territory, what would become Oklahoma, eventually locating in Mexico, where they secured title to their own land. It's a remarkable story. It's overlooked not just by filmmakers, it's not well known in popular culture, and in fact it's been overlooked by historians of slavery, if you can believe it. In the early 18th century, two groups in particular fled the colonial South into Spanish Florida, into the Everglades. One of these groups were Seminoles, who were migrating from various colonies, just trying to avoid white encroachment.
Funny how the image changed.
Trying to move someplace that white colonists weren't. And the other group was runaway slaves, people who were fleeing and trying to create a free life for themselves. Both were welcome in Florida, and in fact, the Spanish crown offered runaway slaves their freedom if they would defend the land for the crown, for the Spanish. So a mixed society emerged in the Everglades of intermarriage, family intermingling between these runaway slaves and the Seminoles. And in fact, the first legally sanctioned black free town in the North American continent was in the Spanish Florida Everglades. After the American Revolution, people living in the southern states didn't really like living that close to a large armed population of former slaves, particularly when they were in league with the local Native American nation, the large armed group of free Seminoles. And they knew that their own slaves felt free to run away and be harbored by this group. They knew that they were welcomed. And so from George Washington's administration on, there was questions of what do we do about the problem of the Florida Everglades.
Send them to Africa.
In 1818.
No. No. She wasn't ready. She wasn't ready.
Some say Georgia, and others even say near Jamestown, Virginia. Regardless, the Africans imported there refused to be enslaved. Vasquez had brought a group of roughly 100 seasoned enslaved Africans and natives from Spain. The enslaved Africans rebelled, with many escaping and taking refuge amongst some of the other native populations. Ironically, one of the first, if not the first slave rebellion within the continental United States was a successful one. The surviving African slaves were considered the first non-native settlers in the region and were pretty much absorbed into the local population. Coming in at number 9,
Lucas Vasquez de Ayllón, who was a wealthy Spanish sugar planter on the island of Hispaniola. It is about 30 years after Columbus has discovered the New World, and the Spanish are laying their claim to goods and resources. Ayllón is trying to grow sugar on the island that is now known as Haiti and the Dominican Republic. But he has a problem in that his slaves are continually dying. On the island that is now known as Haiti and the Dominican Republic. But he has a problem in that his slaves are continually dying. But he has a problem in that his slaves are continually dying. This is the beginning of our story for the settlement called San Miguel de Gualdape, the first attempt at a settlement in South Carolina by Europeans. Ayllón decides to send one of his men named Francisco de Chicora to go find him some more slaves. Ironically, this will be the start of the first South Carolina story. Why is it ironic? Think on that. Ayllón sends a man named Francisco Gordillo to go retrieve natives to use as slaves on his sugar plantation. He meets up with another Spanish slaver named Pedro de Queixos, and the two men start exploring into the North American mainland. They likely land somewhere near what's called Winya Bay and meet up with the Native American tribe in a land that the natives call Chicora. And meet up with the Native American tribe in a land that the natives call Chicora. And meet up with the Native American tribe in a land that the natives call Chicora. Now, the two men have to figure out how to trick natives onto their ship to be used as slaves. Do you have any ideas as to how you would do that? How to get natives on your ship to use as slaves. Pedro de Queixos and Francisco Gordillo trick about 70 natives from the land that they call Chicora by promising them food and a tour of their lovely Spanish ships. We see that while natives encountered these new people and their ships, it wasn't always what they expected it to be. Imagine the feeling. It would be similar, I guess, to being visited by alien spacecraft.
Okay, that's enough of that. It's getting kind of stupid. But you see the point. Now check this out.
So about 70 natives are stolen as slaves from the coast of what we call today South Carolina and brought back to Hispaniola to be used as slaves by Lucas Vasquez de Ayllón. The natives had a bad habit of not taking slavery very well and often dying in the extreme heat and pressure of sugar plantations. One of the men in particular became friends with his captor, Lucas Vasquez de Ayllón, and was named by Ayllón Francisco de Chicora, or Frank from Chicora. Ayllón was so impressed with Francisco de Chicora's storytelling and experiences that he actually brought this native all the way back to Spain. Where Chicora gave his testimony to a man about his experiences at home, often spinning some tall tales about giant natives, sometimes even with tails.
Wonder how many pale Native Americans are out there.
Chicora helped to convince the King of Spain to allow Lucas Vasquez de Ayllón to try to start a Spanish colony in the New World this settlement would become what we call today San Miguel de Gualdape. So Shakura and Aon, perfect bosom buddies, head back across the ocean to try to find a settlement in the land that's called Shakura. This time they come prepared. About 600 settlers, about 200 slaves from Africa,
right,
priests, materials for building, food, and supplies.
But yet the first slaves
settlement
in the
does
Americas
not
were
go
white.
completely
Interesting.
as planned.
From Africa.
Upon arrival to Shakura, very quickly, as soon as he steps foot
Sounds good enough
on
to me. Is this really the face of Brazil indigenous population? Is that why the Brazilian population is over 50% Afro-Brazilian, so-called? It's kind of weird. But these people are considered the indigenous Brazilians. Yep. This Asian lady right here. You know, it's almost like a slap in the face. Indigenous populations. It's kind of hard to understand why he painted his body black. It's weird. But hey, this is Brazil's indigenous population, supposedly. So according to Brazil's new president here, he made a statement saying that if we were to tell the truth about history, the Portuguese never stepped foot in Africa. It was black people themselves who handed over slaves. I find that to be very interesting.
Also declared himself to be pro-torture, has said he'd rather have his son die in a car accident than date another man, and told a female member of Congress he wouldn't rape her because she doesn't deserve it. He also had racist things to say about the black descendants of African slaves, known in Brazil as quilombolas.
Não fazem nada. Eu acho que nem para procriadores serve mais. Não vai ter centímetro demarcado para reserva indígena para quilombola.
But Bolsonaro's place in Brazilian politics was largely seen as that of the provocateur, whose support wasn't expected to rise. Few people expected Bolsonaro to be the favorite for a presidential candidacy at the beginning of this year. Some credit this rise in Bolsonaro's profile to the downfall of the previous leading candidate in these elections, former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva.
Quilombola. They are descendants from Afro-Brazilian slaves who escaped from slavery plantations that existed in Brazil in abolishment in 1888. Interesting. says Afro-Brazilians. But yet, the new president states that the Portuguese never even step foot in Africa. That's interesting.
They convinced the large amount of the population that what the Workers' Party was doing with Lula, creating a welfare system, right, for Brazil, with like programs like Bolsa Familia, and building houses, affordable houses for the people. That said that, well, see, all that spending, now we're paying the price for it. So the discourse is that we need to cut down government spending. So it's really austerity measures. So that's how right, this was undone. And last year, Temer was able to pass a bill in Congress freezing social investment. They call it social spending, but it's really social investment in education and health for 20 years. And now I'm sure that they're going to rush to pass a bill to end Social Security in Brazil. And the landless movement in Brazil is the biggest social movement in Latin America, and they've been fighting for land reform. That Brazil has never had a major land reform. And so it's also a group that's been vilified by the media. They've been portrayed as violent, right? So they exaggerate how they cover this group. And Bolsonaro is a friend of agribusiness, so it's really scary because we have seen a rise in debt among rural workers and the indigenous population. So we're very concerned about what's going to happen now.
His first journey, he saw some strange-looking people there. They didn't come out and say, "Ho, we Indians." He was looking for a new route to India. Found some people that he had never seen before and called them Indians. And since he was sailing west to go east, he called that part the West Indies. So now we're coming up. I am a West Indian. To the brothers and sisters listening in the Caribbean, I want you to know that you ain't no West Indian, you know. You're deeper than that. You are bigger than that. How dare you let the little island on which you live cause you to be separated from your own kith and kin. So one from Jamaica, one from Barbados, one from Trinidad, one from St. Kitts, one from Nevis, one from Barbuda, one from Tortola, one from this, one from that, and you're all arguing and fighting with each other over a term that does not apply to you. Christopher Columbus is not our origin, so he can't call me a West Indian. Neither is Africanus our origin. So you call yourself an African. You are not an African. You were before there was an Africa. Look at yourself. I'm an African American. Stop it! They named this country after Amerigo Vespucci, one of the grafted members of a grafted people that are Johnny-come-latelys on our earth. Now you're going to call yourself an American and an African, both of them named by Caucasian people. What was the original name of that continent? And is that your home? The Honorable Elijah Muhammad said, "What is the square mileage of the earth? How much is the land and how much is the water?" The earth is 196,940,000 square miles. And the land is 57,255,000 square miles. And the water is 139,685,000 square miles. Don't tell me about Africa's my home. No, the earth is my home. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, and we are the Lord's. That the fullness of the earth belongs to. So don't you narrow yourself again after today. We know what you mean when you say I'm an African. We understand that. But you got to grow up now into a deeper knowledge.